Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the GWOTFOB podcast, brought to you by Combat Outpost Robinson, which is doing great things for our veterans. I'm your host, Jim Robinson, and today we have got a very special guest, one that I've been excited to get on for several weeks now, a gentleman by the name of Ryan Walters. And Ryan is, I'll tell you what, there's no other way to explain this guy other than he is an Air Force Helo pilot, and he was one of the Helo pilots on the Bin Laden raid. So, Ryan, welcome to the show. I've been looking forward to this for several weeks, like I said.
Yeah.
And
And Army, certainly we got to get that correct. Army.
oh, it's Army. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
All good.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no,
We
it's
don't
fine.
want to get that mixed up.
No,
So,
it's great. We worked a lot with the Air Force, which is great. So plus they always took
right.
care of us getting us gas in the air with their tankers.
Right.
So yeah, and their JTACs and CCTs. So a lot of great friends there, great people. But yeah, we're all brothers and sisters in arms in the end. That's all that matters. So
Absolutely, absolutely. We've actually got one of our board of directors on Combat Outpost Robin that was a JTAC guy.
okay, excellent.
Yeah, over in Afghanistan. So he's a great guy. So absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
once
and
you,
yeah. Glad to be here. You're in Ohio too, of course, right? So
yeah, I'm on the southern end. You're on the northern end. So
okay, there you go. Yeah, two different planets for the people that are in Ohio. If you ask anybody,
oh
the difference
oh
between
yeah,
Cincinnati and Cleveland and
oh
Toledo
yeah,
and Youngstown. So for a relatively average sized state, they're very distinct corners and ends of the state. So but it's good to
yeah,
see. It's a very diverse
and
state. So
and a big switch in weather.
yeah, the weather's always up and down, and just like some of the sports teams. So yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But no, yeah, glad to be here, and always enjoy talking about being in the military and my experience, and
Absolutely.
certainly the experiences of others. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, glad to
absolutely.
be here. Thanks for having
Well,
me.
absolutely. Thanks for being here. Won't you give us a little background on, uh, where you grew up, what it was like growing up as a kid? Because I know you didn't grow up in Ohio.
No, no, not native to Ohio, but Ohio's home, and I actually grew up in Southern California, in the high
Right.
deserts of Southern California, which is interesting. Growing up in Los Angeles County, out there, going towards Palmdale and Lancaster, is that the mountains and the terrain and the climate, come to find out are not too different than places like Afghanistan in terms of very hot summers and then very cold winters
Right.
and really not much of a spring, not much of a fall. But yeah, I grew up out there, just kind of around aviation and aerospace most of my life, being near, Edwards Air Force Base, China Lake. Used to go to air shows and always had jets flying over my parents' house back then. And it just seemed to make sense when I look back at the old photos my parents had of my brother and I always standing by helicopters and jets, in the 80s, late
Right.
80s and early 90s. And yeah, grew up out there and, been in Ohio now since 2018 after I retired from the Army. But there's obviously a lot that happened between 1998 when I joined the Army and 2018 when I retired. And
Right.
actually started off enlisted in the Army and went into the Army on an airborne ranger contract and ended up at 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis. So I got
Okay.
my start as an infantryman and then jumping out of airplanes and then going through the Ranger indoctrination program and then going to 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis, up in the Pacific Northwest, and then going back to good old Fort Benning, Georgia for Ranger School and making it through the various phases of that.
Right.
And this was pre 9/11, right? So this was late 90s into early 2000s. So as I've talked to others about, it was kind of that, for me growing up in Ranger Regiment, it was kind of the post like Somalia phase where it wasn't that far away. All the stuff that happened in Mogadishu in 1993 was still very close
Right.
for a Ranger Regiment and certainly the 160th. But also, there was a conflict that was still happening in the late 90s in the former Yugoslavia. So there was still shooting and combat going on, but it was starting to taper off a little bit and then just kind of, quiet down. And, it was interesting going, being in the Army and, kind of the post Desert Storm, Gulf War, Yugoslavia conflict to what was a transition into more, focus on urban warfare and things like that. So my experience in Ranger Regiment was, still doing the, classical Ranger missions and training, but also focusing heavily on close quarters combat and, being in the, the fairly early stages for Ranger Regiment of, urban warfare and fighting, but also going through a lot of changes and focusing on the future. And then 9/11 happened and would forever change that regiment as it would go on to
Absolutely.
serve. And if you know any history of the Ranger Regiment, I mean, they were continuously deployed in some capacity from October of 2001 until the end of operations in Afghanistan in 2021, and they still remain deployable or deployed to this day. So
Right.
interesting environment to grow up in, being a young soldier in Ranger Regiment, where the standards were so high, and that really set the foundation for my career before considering becoming a warrant officer and going and flying.
Right. What were deployments like in the Ranger?
So I didn't do any combat deployments because again, this was those transitory years.
Okay.
But we trained a lot. As a young soldier there in my early 20s, being a E4, with a Ranger tab and having all that responsibility, then also, doing stuff where I was, training communications. So I was a RTO, operating comms and all that stuff for the company commander at the time. It was, um, it was very busy because we were always traveling and going on training. We did deployment to Korea for full Eagle when I was in Ranger Regiment, which was interesting. We got to do some airborne operations in South Korea, jumping out of static balloons. We did an airfield seizure over there in the year 2000. And it just seemed like we were like once a month, like doing something, training and always practicing. And that whole environment, pre 9/11, a Ranger Regiment was, always being ready for something and doing a lot of rehearsals where we thought it was real, exercising the system and getting all the way up to the point to where, you're at McChord Air Force Base next door to Fort Lewis and you're ready to board C-17s thinking you're going somewhere, and being a, E4 at that point, you're just really focused on your team and your squad and your platoon. So, we didn't know it was not real, but we treated it as such. And it was just a lot of
Right.
training like that, doing 2-week exercises at Fort Knox, Kentucky, working with the 160th, riding in the back of their helicopters, Air Force Special Ops Command, back when they had MH-53s, doing joint
Right.
readiness exercises. So we were just on the go all the time. And, in that environment, you just have to, adhere to very, very high standards in Ranger Regiment. And like I said, I look back and I probably didn't appreciate it as much as I did then than as I do now. But growing up in Ranger Regiment is probably one of the best places, in the Army that you can start a career because it's such a demanding but professional environment. And it's probably even more so today than it was back then, where the Rangers are treated like professional athletes
Right.
nowadays, as they should be, because the
Oh yeah,
expectation is so
absolutely.
high.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to see, especially special operations units get that level of support and training because that's what they are. I mean, they're well-oiled machines and high valuable resources, and they deserve every bit of support, training, et cetera, that they need. But yeah, it's when I was about 3.5 years into my Army journey, I was kind of at a crossroads of, do I stay in and re-enlist and try something else, or go try this warrant officer flight training program. And kind of always wanted to be a pilot, never thought I could do it. And in the summer of 2001 is when I decided to get myself ready and put in an application to go be a warrant officer and go to the Army's flight school at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Again,
Cool.
this is all happening right before 9/11. So.
Okay. And you're still very much to this day involved in aviation.
Yeah, I work in aerospace and defense, and
Yeah.
still fly helicopters and airplanes here and there. Not as much as I'd
Right.
like, but um, yeah, it's still get to do it, and it's much different doing general aviation flying or civil aviation compared to military.
Right.
That took me a long time to get used to or comfortable with after leaving that environment. But
Right.
yeah, I got picked up for flight school for the Army just a few days before 9/11 happened. and that would forever change the trajectory of my career, and the trajectory for many friends and colleagues as they either stayed in Ranger Regiment or went on to do other things. A lot of times you cross paths in different places with guys that move on to different roles or decide to go do different things. So it was interesting
Right.
to see how that played out. So, but yeah, got picked up for flight school and watched the events of 9/11 happen from the west coast of the U.S. at that time, and I think everybody remembers where they were when that was happening,
Oh yeah,
what was going
absolutely.
on,
Down to the
and
minute.
yeah, down to the minute. So even though it's a long time ago now by today's standards, I think many people it's still very fresh in their minds.
Yep. So, which aircraft did you train in and fly in?
So as 9/11 happened, Third Ranger Battalion would go off and be part of the initial package in Afghanistan, and I would our battalion did not deploy, so I ended up going in January of 2002 to Fort Rucker, Alabama, to start Warrant Officer Candidate School. And Warrant Officer Candidate School is kind of a accelerated officer candidate school where they just kind of baseline everybody to kind of take you from being enlisted to being a WO1, a brand new warrant officer. And I did that, and then in the Army's flight school in May of 2002. So look back, gosh, 24 years ago now. I was waiting to start my flight training, and the first aircraft we flew back then was a Bell 206. Kind of
Okay.
like a news helicopter, right? A little bit different,
Right.
but did that, and that's how you learned how to fly as a brand new pilot. And then once I went through the initial training, and you do your solo and all your different requirements, and you go into your instrument training in the same type of helicopter. And then after that, I actually started flying UH-60 Blackhawks initially.
Okay.
And
That's a big jump.
yeah, it's a big jump. So and did that, and actually got reassigned graduating flight school in early 2003. I actually got reassigned back to Fort Lewis, Washington. And mind you, this is when Iraq was happening, OIF-1.
Right.
And I knew the unit I was going back to was a medical evacuation company that was there at Fort Lewis with the 62nd Medical Brigade at the time. So for those that served in Vietnam or other wars, Dust Off was the nickname of
Hmm.
medevac, and still is to this day in the Army.
Right.
And would go back to the 54th Medical Company at Fort Lewis, only to find out that the whole entire unit was gone. They had deployed to support the initial phases of OF1 in 2003. And
Okay.
I signed in, and then was quickly sent to catch up with them. And as a brand new pilot, I would touch a real Army helicopter for the first time in Iraq, in Kirkuk, in kind of north central Iraq. And
Okay.
I would spend the first year as a new pilot flying medevac missions across Iraq, mostly in Kirkuk and a little bit Mosul and Balad. But it was an interesting experience going straight from training environment straight to combat. That would be my first exposure to what combat was like, was flying medical
Right.
evacuation in Iraq. So
That's interesting. So, um, how many deployments did you do in Iraq?
so went there a total of two times. That
Okay.
one 11-month long deployment was flying medevac, and then I would finish that deployment in 2004. And then when I came back, got married, and that's my connection back to Ohio. As my wife is from up here, so
Okay.
met her while I was on my travels and journeys and in the Army, and we stayed in touch. And I put her through the year-long deployment to Iraq before we got married. But that in between time, I came back in 2004, and we found out that the unit was going to deploy again in December of 2005. I decided
Right.
that if I'm going to keep deploying, I might as well go back to special operations. And I decided that the best path for me was to go apply to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and then see if I could get an assessment. You apply, you can't just show up there. You have to go through a rigorous assessment process.
Right.
And I wasn't certain I'd get picked up because I was a young aviator still, but I had a year-long combat rotation under my belt, and actually got picked up to go do an assessment in January 2005. And I still remember the medevac commander at the time told me, hey, we're deploying again for another 12 to 15 months. if you
Right.
don't make it through the assessment, we'll see you over there. If not, and if you do make it, then good luck. And I told him, I'll see you around. My goal is to make it through. And I went through the assessment process there with the 160th, made it through, and then was assigned to 2nd Battalion 160th. And then this is when I transitioned over to flying Chinook helicopters and would finish my career as a Chinook aviator
Okay.
there in the 160th. So quite busy career, very fast paced in only a few
Yeah,
years.
and some very big leaps in aviation equipment there too. So
Yeah, it was interesting going from a very simple and basic UH-60 A model, which was just it's a great aircraft, very reliable aircraft, but in terms of technology, it was just a very straightforward helicopter, as we call it in Army Aviation vernacular, just steam gauges. Nothing fancy about it, no cool screens or things like that, but
right,
it was a reliable aircraft, did its job well, and our whole entire mission for that first year in Iraq was to pick up casualties or patients, whether they were injured by improvised explosive devices or
right,
wounded in combat. Our goal was to pick them up and get them to a medical treatment facility as fast as possible. And I look back at that time, and as a new pilot, we were pretty much on our own. We weren't armed, based on the stipulations of the Geneva Conventions, and being a medical evacuation helicopter, you had a Red Cross on the side, and
right,
a positive attitude and a willingness to go do whatever it takes to get to the patient. So, we had no advanced technology on the aircraft. We had a flight medic and a crew chief in the back, and just a simple old school GPS in the cockpit with a set of grid coordinates that we flew to, and no defensive weapons, no true aircraft survivability equipment, and we had no other weapon systems. We're just kind of carrying pistols as sidearms, and just trying to get to the patient as quickly as possible, figure out what's going
right,
on at the scene, and get them back to a hospital. And oftentimes we would be the first helicopter on scene before Apache attack helicopters or other aircraft showed up. So that
right.
was interesting because the situation was often dynamic, right? You're being called out to a site where there might be an IED strike or other things, and there's still a lot of chaos happening there, at the scene, and
Oh,
you're
I'm
just
sure.
trying to
Yeah,
figure out, what's going on with the patient. And mind you, I'm, 22, 23 years old at the time, so still
right,
pretty young and trying to process all this. And, you're landing on busy roads and there's traffic going around the helicopter, and you're just trying to, get your flight medic and crew chief out to help, the medics on the ground get the patients loaded up as quickly as possible. So,
right.
you know, um, still very important work, but again, we were just kind of
Oh,
out there by
absolutely.
ourselves.
Yeah,
So very
and the
rewarding
fact
work.
that and the fact that you're going in unarmed is just
Yeah.
mind boggling. And I don't think the average person out there that doesn't have any military experience or family member in the military,
Yeah.
I don't think they understand that.
Yeah, it's wild, because you think about it, as I mentioned a few moments ago, it's still a dynamic situation. In some cases you're going in there and there's still very much a gunfight happening around you, and
Right.
you're a big target. So
Absolutely.
you're
I
taking a lot
mean,
of risk to go in there, but the payoff, the risk versus reward payoff, is that you're there to increase the chances that that soldier survives the traumatic injury. And
right.
there were cases where we I still remember it. There's an article somewhere. I'd have to dig it up and send it to you. But there was I want to say it was in September or October, maybe 2003, not far from Balad, Iraq. There was a Fourth Infantry Division was at a forward operating base away from the main airfield that we were at, and there was like a mortar attack, and there were some people really, really wounded. And I remember there was a write up about this, but we got just a very quick call, like get out there as fast as you can and get back. So we rushed out there and landed, inside of this fob that was still under attack, getting hit by mortar rounds, and picked up a PFC or specialist. I'd have to look up his name, escapes me at the moment, but he had been like severely wounded and was bleeding out like profusely, shrapnel through his legs or something. And, they had
Right.
tourniquets on, and, we got got him, on the helicopter quickly and got back to Balad, to LSA Anaconda, and got him to the medical evacuation pad in the hospital. And we found out that, months later, there was some big article written up about him. And you looked at, just for that one soldier, and most people don't process this, to your point, is that for, us getting to tell, get that soldier off the battlefield and be part of the, life-saving care, we were like, our crew was like 4 out of like 70 people that had contributed to life-saving care to save that soldier's life, which is crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because they
Those
actually
first few
listed,
minutes are crucial.
yeah, yeah, and they listed everybody in the chain of events, from the helicopter crew, our crew, to the people on the forward surgical team that, started operating on him, to, the dozen, maybe 20, 30 people that donated blood because he had lost so much blood. And, they were
Right.
donating blood in real time in combat and blood products. So, you look at that, the craziness of that story. That's just one vignette. And that was not uncommon that, people even in combat are making additional sacrifices to try to save, their colleague. Or if they
Right.
don't know them, they're going to go and like, hey, we need people to donate blood because we need more, O positive, B negative, whatever. And that was pretty
Right.
common over there, that in those early years, that people would go above and beyond just to try to help save one life. And that was the most rewarding, aspect of flying medevac at that time. Was, yeah, looking back, having become a very tactically adept pilot in the 160th, where tactics were paramount, and studying risk and threats, and looking back at those years where it was just like point A to point B as fast as possible, get the
Right.
patient back to the hospital as fast as possible. It wasn't cavalier or cowboy, but it was realizing that we had to do what we had to do at the time to help save a life.
Exactly.
And that's why that community is interesting, because you talk to a lot of soldiers in Vietnam that worked with dust off helicopters, and that mindset, that mentality was present back then, no different than it was, in 2003, no different than it is
Oh
today.
yeah.
That you'll go above and beyond if there's a chance to save a life. And
Right.
that to me was a summary of what military service was all about. Was you're there, so you got to do your best, whether you agree with the
Absolutely.
circumstances. And yeah, those were formative years. I look back, that was a 1 year deployment, but it was a very impactful year spent in combat, right?
Ex-
So
yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, I've got the utmost respect for you and those that played that role, because I think I shared with you when we first started talking. Uh, I lost my oldest son in Afghanistan,
yeah,
and it was due to a mortar attack on their fob.
yeah,
So the guys on the ground there, the medevac units, they did everything they could,
oh yeah,
and I know they did that, and for that I'm very appreciative. I'm very thankful. Uh, they got him to Bagram fairly quickly. I mean, he was a
yeah,
long way from Bagram,
oh yeah.
so I mean, it was just the time was not on his side. That's about what it amounted to. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's difficult because that was a good news story, to your point. But there are many cases where no matter what we did, even in the 160th, where we did not medevac per se, we did casualty evacuation. I've told a story in some other podcasts about cases where we expended, and the ground customer, the SEALs we were working with, expended every last drop of sweat equity to try to save a life. And in the end, their colleague, who was, gravely wounded, did not survive.
right,
So, there are many, many cases where we expended every last drop of, blood, sweat, tears, and squeezed every
absolutely,
last, ounce of performance out of our aircraft to try to save a life. And in the end, it didn't work out. But, we knew, consciously, with a clear mind, that we did everything that we had control of to try to improve the odds and improve the outcome for that
absolutely,
people or those persons, to try to save their life. And
absolutely.
unfortunately, you can only do so much. But
Yep.
we knew
I
at the end of the day that we did everything we could conceivably do. So
right, and a couple of years after my son had passed, uh, I had a gentleman reach out to me, and I don't know how he found me, but he did.
yeah,
but he was the surgeon that actually worked on my son at Bagram,
Okay.
and he was still having problems dealing with it.
Yeah,
And I
it's
told
not
him, I said,
easy.
listen, I told him, I said, don't beat yourself up. I
Yeah.
said, I honestly believe that you did your best and everything in your power to save him.
Yeah.
I said, but don't beat yourself up over it. So,
Yeah, it's not easy. It's of course lost I personally have lost many friends too in combat over there. So and it's in some cases it's been 20 plus years and you never forget the events, what happened, if you were either there or
oh
even,
no,
many
yeah,
times we were home and you're always rotating to and from combat. We did a lot of short, frequent deployments, so it wasn't uncommon for us in the 160th to go over 2 or 3 times a year for, you know, 30 days, 90 days. So you're kind of, you and your friends are kind of on this rotation where, some people are home, some people are gone, and you're just always
right,
alternating. And there were cases, sort times where those friends and coworkers, your friends in the army that you're same unit with, deployed, and then at the time you didn't know that was the last time you're going to see them alive because of what would happen, whether it was mishap or crash, as was the case for us, losing a crew in the 160th in 2007. You never forget them, and the best thing you can do is just continue to keep them at the top of mind and never forget the
absolutely,
sacrifice. We celebrate the anniversary of certain events every year a
absolutely,
certain way, and you can it's very difficult to find that level of camaraderie and loyalty and trust and friendship and brotherhood, having served in those units where you're spending so much time with them, in some cases, as much time with them as you do with your family because of the environment. So
oh
it's
yeah. I mean, you're spending
yeah,
just as much, if not more, time with them
yeah,
than you are your immediate family. So,
yeah. So you get very close with people, you get to know everything about them, what makes them tick,
absolutely, absolutely,
so yeah, no,
absolutely,
it was interesting. Like, the medical evacuation piece is not something I talk about a whole lot because most of my career was in the 160th. But I look at the things we did in the 160th and under casualty evacuation. I mean, we had some incredible resources and training too to go on top of that. And we the casualty evacuation is much different because we can come in shooting and defending ourselves and increasing the odds for the guys on the ground that are injured.
all right,
And yeah, we had an extremely robust medical capability with our special operations flight medics and surgeons and some additional resources. So, you know, kind of the same mentality, right? Whether you're putting, SEALs or Delta operators on a target or coming in to get Rangers that are wounded off of a target, the
right,
mindset and focus is the same. You want to increase the odds and get them back to treatment as quickly as possible. And sometimes you have to shoot your way in and shoot your way out to get the job done. But that's what we did, and I was
right,
always happy to go back in and get wounded off the battlefield as quickly as possible. So
right. All right. So let's jump forward just a little bit here,
yeah.
and you got chosen to pilot one of the helos
Mhm.
on the infamous Bin Laden raid,
That's a true statement.
and it's my understanding that that helo was a whole different ball game as far as learning to fly it. Did you go through any kind of special training, or did it just throw you to
Well,
the wolves?
yeah. Well, for me, it's I flew Chinook that night, so for me it was the same aircraft, but
Okay.
it wasn't so much about the mission. We, as I've explained to others, on a mission of that scale, um, the level of focus doesn't change. Whether I was doing a routine special operations mission in Afghanistan or doing a complex mission like that one, it's the most interesting part of that was just the build up. And I say
Okay.
that because this is 10 years later after 9/11,
Right.
and it's most people are wise enough to realize that this wasn't the first time something was attempted to maybe try to locate a target such as that. So
Right.
this just happened to be, and my gut feeling was this just happened to be the closest shot we were going to take. And what felt different about this one than previous attempts was this one felt like it actually was going to really happen. So it wasn't so much about the details of the mission. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it was more about the experience and the build up in the months ahead of, understanding the complexity, the criticality, and the potential outcome, and then being trained in doing certain things and going certain places. That was an interesting experience and something I'll never forget. Just the level of exposure I got that we're not going to talk about on this podcast openly because of
Right.
the nature of it, but um, it gave me a lot of reassurance, and the people that support the things that we do, and maybe the people that are in the shadows in the background that contribute to complex missions like that. So for me, it was really a learning experience, and I was a brand new flight lead at that point. So I just not even 6 months before been progressed to be a flight lead in the 160th, which is unique because in the 160th you have different layers of progression. So when you make it through the training pipeline, and mind you, the training pipeline in the 160th, you end up flying more hours than you do in primary flight training in the Army. So it's almost like going back through flight school all over again because you have to learn new tactics, new aircraft, and the mission set and the capabilities of the organization are completely different than any other organization out there in the military. So much of it is getting you comfortable in air-to-air refueling, which is a unique capability for the 160th. The Army does not possess different tactics, different mission profiles and customers. So, for me, the most interesting piece of this was just the months leading up to it, and just getting to become very comfortable with what we were about to do, but also becoming very, very impressed with the amount of resources and the level of effort that goes into a mission of that scale and complexity. So, you know, um, the mission night was what it was. It's we treated it no differently than any other mission. Granted, the stakes and
Right.
the outcome could be much higher, but I've told people that it was a difficult, complex night, but I've had far worse nights on what would have been routine missions in Afghanistan where everything was chaotic. There was a lot of shooting, and people wounded on target, and we're still going to give the same level of focus and dedication to that kind of mission because that's how we
Oh yeah,
operate.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I would say it did really. I felt like I matured very quickly in a short period of time just because of the level of exposure I got as a young flight lead. And you plan a mission like that and of that magnitude, and you always plan a very solid, achievable base plan. But you're also always very invested in the contingencies. And in the case of a mission like that, the base plan went out the window quickly, and then it turned into a contingency where you have to be able to react immediately on those contingencies. And I will say, going into a mission like that I felt extremely prepared. I think my crew felt the same way. We felt ready for whatever the night was going to throw at us going into it. That didn't mean it was going to be easy, but we were mentally prepared to work through nominally a good base plan and execute as planned, but also prepared to change things up when things went sideways. And things certainly went sideways on that mission, as we know. But
Right.
to the credit of the collective team, everybody played their part and worked through the contingencies, and
Right. The
nobody
objective was met.
yeah,
Yeah.
the objective was met. Humans are more important than hardware is
Absolutely.
a statement that we say, an ethos that we live by, especially in special operations. And,
Right.
a helicopter is replaceable. But the fact that we were
Absolutely.
able to work through it and complete the mission and get everybody home safely, that was the most important objective of that night, was to get through the night safely, complete the mission, and get home alive in one piece. And yeah, it was an experience.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I've had way, way more, you know, as difficult as it may be to believe, I've been, way more chaotic missions,
Well,
where
I
things
can
went
understand
sideways
that
too. Yeah,
because, yeah, I mean, I can understand that because the Bin Laden mission took place in Pakistan.
yeah,
So you didn't have all the hostile fire coming at you like you would have inside of Afghanistan.
yeah. Well, not yet, right? There's always
So,
a threat of that.
right,
So
right. Oh, yeah,
it's
absolutely. You didn't know what he had up his sleeve
yeah.
at the
So
compound. So,
yeah. Plus, you're in a different environment, different country. There's not a normal presence there, but you look
right,
at a place like a routine night in Afghanistan, depending on where you're at, you could be, there are many cases where, we would do stuff in southern Afghanistan. I, did over 20 deployments throughout the years in Afghanistan. Again, those short, frequent deployments. So, me personally, I was in Afghanistan every year from 2006 until 2014, 2015, and then we started going back to Iraq and Syria with the changeover with what was happening there with ISIS and all that,
right,
and
right,
pivot to defeating those actors. So but for us, there were certain areas where deployments where I've had cases where we went out, almost every single night on routine for us routine missions, special operations missions around the Helmand River Valley, and every night was somebody shooting. Just
absolutely.
because you've got a
Absolutely.
concentrated threat, you've got pattern of life there where they know where you're going to come from, what bases you're going to operate out of. They're,
Right.
in the case of the Taliban, were conditioned to fighting, and
Yep.
they know that every night stuff's going to be flying in there to try to come after them, their friends, or what or stop the activities that they're doing. So
Right. Yeah.
um, in that case, it's I'm not marginalizing what happened at all with that mission in Pakistan, but it's we've been in missions where there was a lot more kinetic activity happening around us, and that was kind of
Right.
the norm in certain areas. So um, yeah, it's just I'd say the hardest part, and the other thing I think myself and many of my friends, that are retired now that survived all those years of just constant deployments are you go from that continuous environment of always deploying, and you're these stressful missions and high stakes missions, and dangerous missions, landing in the dust and getting shot at or doing a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
shooting is you go from that to a normal life after the military. And I think from the I think I can say pretty confidently for the special operations community especially, and certainly for the conventional forces that did quite a bit of fighting, is that when you're living in that kind of tempo at all times and then you come back, you can't just switch it off.
No.
And
No.
yeah, it's something that's it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. And like I said, I've been retired almost 8 years now, and I still to this day my brain has been reprogrammed to always be switched on. Like everything could be fine and calm around me, and my wife can certainly attest to this too, and probably my daughter and my friends.
Oh, I'm sure everybody. Yeah.
But when you go from that environment, it's I think it's something you have to manage for the rest of your life. Just the hyper awareness of what's going on around you, and for me, it's not so visibly obvious, but I just feel like myself, many of my colleagues, like you just have this kind of like you know I don't know if it's anxiety or just this feeling of reacting to something in the background. I don't know if that would categorically qualify as anxiety, but it's almost like you're always just waiting for something to happen, and you're kind of almost in like fight or flight, not
Yes.
an elevated level, but it's just because you spent so much time in that environment, and there's so many super stressful missions and nights where, because we worked 14-hour crew days over there, so there are cases where we were just completely gassed after a mission, and or
Oh, I'm
sometimes you
sure.
go,
Yeah.
your 14-hour day turns into an 18-hour day or 24-hour day or 36-hour day, and
Right.
you're working daylight throughout the night, the sun's back up, and you're still out supporting actions on an objective, which happen periodically too, where you're
Right.
way stretched into your extensions, and you've been awake for over 24 hours and you're still performing at high levels. So I think for a lot of veterans that live through those environments. That permanently rewires your brain and who you are. And
I would agree
it's
with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's difficult to cope with that. There's some a lot of ways through healthcare treatment, through other non-traditional treatments, but um, I think it's something that I live with. We live with it as a family because the other side of that is, you're doing, all those combat deployments and rotations for years while your family is back here.
Right.
For for my wife and my daughter, she was
Yep. It's not
still
easy
very
for
young.
them either. So,
No, because you think about it, for them it's if I'm deployed, I'm deployed. It doesn't matter if to them if I'm
right.
flying and getting shot at, or there's weather and we're not flying that night, we're just at the gym and playing video games, we're still
Right.
deployed. So that doesn't
Exactly.
change the level of stress or anxiety that they have of what's happening. And
Right.
what I notice right now with all the stuff happening in the world too is, I realize I noticed this in with the pullout of Afghanistan in 2021, being retired. And I'm noticing this with all the activities in Venezuela and Iran right now, is that this would be the first time as an adult that I've seen through the eyes of, just society and people and what you see in the media, the perspective of what's happening abroad, opposed
Right.
to living in that, being over there
Right.
and being kind of oblivious to how things were reported about Iraq or Afghanistan or other places we were at. So it's an
Right.
interesting position to be in, kind of on the outside looking in, but still having a lot of friends who are, heavily involved in, military activity still. So it's
Right.
interesting time, keeping not diving into politics. That's not the scope of this, but yeah, it's just interesting being kind of on the outside as a family looking into
Oh, I'm sure it's
what's
I'm sure
happening.
it's a shock to you. I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. So but yeah, it's interesting times we live in for sure. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you
Sometimes
saw an
you just got to
incredible,
scratch your head and think, well,
yeah,
what were they thinking?
yeah. But what's but yeah, what you saw this last weekend with what happened with the recovery of the F-15 pilot
Right.
and Wizzo. I mean, it's still high stakes, high risk, and
Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
irrespective of the politics involved in it and what's happening and whether we should or shouldn't be there.
Right. You got to
Um,
take all that out of the equation. You got to look at,
yeah,
what happened? What's the facts?
yeah,
So,
yeah. It's just it's impressive still. Not that I would expect anything less. It's impressive to
oh
see
yeah,
people give it 110% to save their comrade in arms in this case. So
absolutely.
that's quite impressive.
Yes, it is.
So. But yeah, that's a lot of my story compressed down to 43 minutes. It's been a wild ride.
I'm
Now I just
sure.
work at,
Yeah.
yeah, now I just live in Ohio, and we like to go to baseball games, and hopefully the weather
Right.
keeps getting nice. And
Right.
uh, now I just work as an
And,
executive
and
in aerospace and defense. So
and wasn't you just at Helicom?
what's that?
Wasn't you just at Helicom down in Georgia?
Yeah, yeah, last month we were at, there's an annual event called Verticon, used to be Heli
Verticon. That's
Expo.
it.
Yeah.
Verticon. Yeah.
Yeah. So go to that and, go to all the main trade shows.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Anything interesting?
it's always good to see what's going on in the civil helicopter market. So it's
Oh yeah.
yeah, the helicopter community is a special, unique community. So
There's 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 one bird that I've been kind of following and keeping my eye on, and I'm kind of leery now that if it's ever going to see production,
yeah,
and that's the Hill HX50 over in England. So
okay,
I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but they've been building a helicopter for about 6 or 7 years now, and I don't know
okay.
if they're getting any closer to production or not. But they're taking pre-orders.
Yeah, it's interesting because you got some some big names and players now. Robinson's a company that's
Oh,
growing
Robbins is one
immensely.
of the big ones. Yeah,
Yeah, so Robinson's
yeah,
competing now.
they
They've
got that new 88 out. So
Yep. So, they've got that going, the R66, 44, of course,
right,
Bell and Airbus and Leonardo. So yeah, it's a very competitive landscape. And, it's
yeah,
interesting because actually when I first retired, I worked at the VA for 2 years. So I didn't go straight into aerospace and defense.
okay,
Yeah, I actually worked at the main VA hospital here in Cleveland for a couple of years in healthcare administration and then medical supply
Okay.
chain. So again, that was an interesting experience. Going from the military into a big bureaucratic beast, which is the Veterans Healthcare Administration. One of the three pillars within the VA. So
Right.
yeah, it was interesting to do that. But aerospace and defense, I enjoy it because it's what I'm familiar with, and
Right.
there's just so much stuff going on. There's so much modernization right now. If you look at
Oh, I'm sure there is. Yeah.
yeah, not just aviation, but ground soldier equipment, ground vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much technology that's out there, and
Yep. Weapons
the evo
technology's improving
yeah
as well. So,
yeah the evolution is pretty wild when you look at just how fast things are going, and there's so many different players now involved in aerospace and defense that are really pushing the art of the possible and pushing the envelope to try to get technology faster,
oh, yeah.
into the hands of soldiers faster. So, but in the
Yep.
end, technology is only one component of it. You still have humans in the loop,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so long as you have humans in the loop, you have to continue to factor that in. We're not going down the path of full autonomy robot soldiers, but it's interesting, just seeing how fast technology is adapting to try to solve problems of the past more quickly. So
Yes.
interesting times.
Oh, for sure. Let me ask you this question.
Yeah,
Now that you've been out for a little while and you're still flying,
yeah,
uh, how does it feel if you just go out for a solo flight, just a pleasure flight?
yeah,
Is it calming or soothing to you as far as being able to relax your mind,
yeah,
or is it something that brings back stuff that you really don't want to revisit? Or
yeah. No, it's most of those, not all of those. It's kind of weird. Just a quick story on that is when I retired, I was completely against like flying, and I was that way because I just felt like I couldn't, if I couldn't do it the way that I used to do it, then why keep doing it? And it took me a couple years to get into general aviation flying. So back in 2003 in flight school, when you finish like your instrument training and stuff, then you meet the requirements to go take the FAA written test. So I was able, like many flight school students did and probably still do, I was able to go take the FAA written for the military competency to get a commercial helicopter rating from the FAA. So
okay,
you didn't have to go do a flight test. You just went and took your written test, and the middle
okay, you
competency
didn't have
said
you didn't have to do a check ride.
no, because they took your
Okay,
military records and said you flew X number of hours, you've
well that's
soloed, and
great.
they've so not thinking I would ever use it. So I did that and got my, at the time, commercial rotorcraft and instrument rating.
Okay,
And when I was getting ready to retire, I was coming up to Cleveland usually like once a month and like meeting people and interviewing. And I met a guy who has since passed away last year, named Andy Jones. And Andy was a paratrooper in the Army a long time ago.
okay,
And he got out and got into, computers and computer science and that stuff. When he got out, he was a paratrooper in Alaska. This is, I want to say maybe like 93, 94 is when he got out. And,
okay,
but he always wanted to fly. So he got himself into aviation and he started, as a side project, buying airplanes and, putting some work into them and making them better and then selling them and flipping them for a profit. And then
hmm
he kept flying, getting his instructor ratings and, started teaching and had multiple airplanes. He worked with a company that did avionics upgrades for general aviation aircraft in Mansfield, Ohio, and he was just really into aviation. Had his multi-engine ratings and his ATP and all these different ratings. And I got to know him when he was with a company called MCPC. I actually went and met with them and kind of talked about some job prospects. I was looking at the job market before retiring, and he and I just stayed in touch. And he for 2 years just kept hassling me. When are you going to come fly? Let's go fly. Let's get you in the air and let's do some airplane stuff. So he became an excellent just friend, really really amazing human being. We all miss him certainly,
I'm
but
sure, yeah.
he hassled me, and then finally got me in the air and said, "Look, let's maybe consider your private pilot airplane." He's like, "But if you really wanted to, because you have your helicopter rating, you can actually go right after your commercial airplane single engine rating." He's like, "It's going to be a little, more hours, but it's going to be a better experience, and you're going to do better maneuvers." So I took him up on it. We went flying in a Piper Turbo Arrow that he had. This was almost 6 years ago now, and just stuck with it and flew the hours, and went down, skipped the private pilot airplane, and went after the commercial airplane single
Okay.
engine land rating. And he was one of those guys. He didn't just do this for me, but he wanted to make aviation achievable for a lot of people. He taught a lot of guys multi-engine and got them ready for their check rides to start
Right.
to meet the baseline requirements to go after entry-level airline jobs. And this was all of his side job. He was an executive in, like IT and IT security. So, but he was just one of those guys that took his resources and said, "Look, if you're going to go after this, I'll help you out as much as you can. Use my airplanes. I'll put you on the insurance. You just pay for fuel."
Wow.
And
That's
that's what,
amazing.
yeah, it's amazing. So it's like, he did that for me, and not just me, other people. And I got into it and did my solo, and then he had a Piper Cherokee that I flew in, and I'll tell you, like during my solos in an airplane, he watched my first solo in a 172 back in 2020, and that was down in Medina in that area.
Okay.
And once I was done with that, he just said, "Let's keep going after this. Turn you loose in the Cherokee." And that's what I did. I have a lot of time just flying by myself in a little Piper Cherokee. And I'm not a small guy; I'm a tall guy.
Right.
Flying to State College, PA, and all over the region, just getting my hours in, and
Right.
doing some long cross countries with him. Flying to Zanesville and down to Dayton at night in a
Yeah.
182. Flying a 172, the Turbo Arrow.
Ever
172 RGs.
you ever fly into Urbana for lunch?
I think we have, yeah, yeah. I'm pretty sure I've flown
That
into Urbana.
yeah, that's a neat little airport. They got that little restaurant right there. A lot of people
Yeah,
fly. A lot of people fly in there just to eat.
yeah, yeah. I'm almost certain I've flown into Urbana, so I'll have
Yeah.
to look at my flight records. But yeah, I just got into it, and for a while there, kind of, I was resistant to it, mostly because it was so different from how I was used to flying in the military. And Andy helped me kind of, and some others. Kind of get over the plateau of, you can just go fly because you want to go fly, and like go fly around Cleveland and go fly out to
Right.
Sandusky and Catawba and fly around the islands up here, just
Right.
because you just want to go fly and look at them. So um, once I kind of cleared that and realized that you don't need a mission at all times to go fly. And mind you, we
Right.
flew in the MH-47. It was communal flying, because I had myself, I had a co-pilot. In a combat configuration, I had a flight engineer and three crew chiefs. So you've got lots of
Right.
people in the aircraft. And Army flying is not painless. It's usually painful, because you can't just jump in a Chinook and go fly. It's always a
Right.
process. You have to
Right.
plan everything. So whereas general aviation flying was more of like, okay, let's pre-flight the aircraft. Aircraft's good, everything's safe.
Right.
Weight and balance is good, fuel is good, weather is good, NOTAMs, and we're gonna fly. The mission today is to fly to Urbana and go get a cheeseburger or breakfast and
Right.
come home, just to fly.
Right.
So once I made that mental shift, it became more enjoyable. But for me, which was it was just kind of a bucket list item, was yeah, a couple of years ago, once I got my commercial airplane rating and I passed my check ride with the DP from the FAA, is I was able to actually take my daughter out in that same Cherokee that I had done most of my time in, and just like fly. And there was one really cool flight we did with her, and it was just me and her, and we went out flying on the evening of, I think it was July 3rd, just a perfect like Ohio summer evening. The
Right.
sun's gonna set, the weather was perfect, zero wind, and we were just flying around, and people are shooting fireworks off in the area, and it was just like one of those just super cool moments where I got to share what I'd been through with my daughter in this case. And it was just the two of us out flying, like that to me, like really made the mental shift, like, okay, this is fun and we can do it. I've not
Right.
flown an airplane now in a while, and most of that's because I've been so busy with work, but also because Andy had passed away last year in a unfortunately in a fatal helicopter crash down by Mogador. But I'd like to get more into flying the airplanes because it is fun, and just you know, getting out there and now that I've made kind of the mental shift that it's what I'm good at.
Right.
Helicopters I'm really good at, but you know, there's going to be a limit to what I do in helicopters going forward, I think.
Right.
Just because, in the end, I think airplanes are certainly more accessible for general aviation. And, if you look at certain airplanes nowadays, modern single engine airplanes have so many different safety features.
Oh
Cirrus
yeah.
airplanes, they've got the ballistic parachutes, light sport aircraft. So there's a lot of layered safety features that if stuff goes
Right.
really sideways, you just
Right.
blow the chute and you're going to come down safely, and airbags and the harnesses
I
deploy. So,
I saw recently where and I can't remember what brand it was, but there was a helicopter that had a chute on the top of the rotor.
yeah, I think the Russians have some crazy stuff with ejection seats,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's helicopters are fun. But I think when it comes to accessibility and just the you know least amount of stress, I would definitely like to get back into some airplane flying. I think, and
Yeah.
maybe explore that one of these days. But I'm also a huge motorsports fan and really into cars, so that's how else I plug
Right.
the gaps from the military career as a family. We go to IndyCar races, so we'll be going up to
Oh,
Road
that's fun.
America
Yeah.
in Wisconsin.
Right. Well, you're not
But
that
yeah,
far from from the Lexington track either. They're
no,
just
we
about they're up there
yeah
close to
we
Mansfield.
yeah, we've gone to Mid Ohio for IndyCar the last couple
Yeah,
of
Mid
years, and we're gonna
Ohio. That's
give
what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good time. But we're gonna go check out Road America in Wisconsin this summer. But yeah, we watch NASCAR and
Okay.
Formula One and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's no, I've got a lot of buddies that fly still. They got out and they fly, privately
Okay.
or commercially. A lot of guys, believe it or not, Army helicopter pilots, they go through the transition and get all their airplane time, and they actually go and enter the airlines. So there's
Oh, okay.
a whole group of Army pilots that are, flying for United, American,
Right.
Delta, Southwest, Frontier. So
Yeah.
if you're ever flying any one of those airlines nowadays, there's a good chance there could be a converted Army helicopter pilot up front that's now a jet pilot
Absolutely.
flying. So,
Absolutely. In
but
fact, I've got another board member uh, who's an Army loadmaster,
okay,
and she married a guy that's quite a bit older than her, but
yeah,
he's a Desert Storm guy, but
okay,
she was Iraq, but he was an Air Force pilot, and
okay,
now he's flying for one of the major airlines now. I can't remember
nice.
which one, but he's gone constantly somewhere.
Yeah, always busy.
So yeah,
But yeah, no, that's kind of my background here in almost 1 hour. So
yeah,
hopefully
uh,
gives you some key insights into what being an Army aviator is like.
ab-
And
absolutely. And before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to talk about or bring up that we didn't talk about or anything?
no, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to get out and finally meet you and talk with you.
Oh yeah,
And I'm
absolutely,
certain we'll stay in touch. And like I
absolutely.
said, it's
And the next time I get up towards Cleveland, I'd like to take you
yeah,
out to lunch.
yeah, for sure. We'll stay in touch. But no, I just really appreciate
Yeah,
the opportunity to talk with you and share a little bit about what life was like in the military.
yeah, absolutely. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this up and stick around for a second, and we'll
Absolutely.
get this uploaded. And let's see.
It's 2010. It's approximately 18:30 in the evening here at Forward Operating Base, Forest. Please tell me your name and your rank, sir.
My name's Corporal Jimmy Robinson.
Congratulations, you just got promoted here. First time being promoted away from the States?
No, I got promoted to PFC during my first deployment.
So this is your second deployment, is that right?
It's actually my third.
Your third. First one in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I've done 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan.
All right. Tell me, what's your job?
Good job. I'm a fire team leader, Alpha team leader under Sergeant Riley.
And how old are you, sir?
27.
How long you been in the Army?
I've been in a little bit over 5 years.
Where do you hail from?
Originally from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Home of the Bengals, is that right?
That's right.
I was speaking with Sergeant Riley earlier, and he spoke quite highly of you. You guys look like you have a really tight group here.
Yeah, it's we're all really close. We're all pretty good friends across the board.
You have family back home?
Yeah, I've got a wife and 2 kids back at Fort Campbell.
Congratulations, and their names?
Thank you. My wife's name's Kate, and my oldest daughter is Emily, and youngest is Tori.
Anything you want to say to them?
I love you guys. I miss you.
Very good. Corporal Robinson, congratulations on your promotion.
All right, thank you very much.
And be safe out here.
I'll try.
It's Jim Sperry, August 15, 2010, at the promotion of Corporal Robinson. Corporal, what's your first name again?
It's Jimmy.
Jimmy. That's an easy name to remember. My name's Jim.
It works, huh?
All right, roger that, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Congratulations.